Hi everyone, and welcome to the history lessons in Edupedia World. Today we are going to continue on the subject of the concentration camps of Japanese Americans during the Second World War. And this is part 2, so if you haven't seen part 1, better go to the first lesson and then come back and watch this one. In this second part, we are going to see how the life was in the camps and the ruses that the government applied to justify its horrible actions. The medium that will be mostly used for this, we'll see, is photography. And it'll be exactly through these pictures that we are going to see the record of the events and try and understand how these pictures were used to modify public opinion. We'll see that the WRA, the War Relocation Authority, contracted various photographers to document the evacuation and the internment of the population in these camps. Their aim wasn't not only to document events, that it was, but it also had a specific objective. What they wanted to achieve with this photography was sometimes difficult and a bit contradictory. They actually wanted to find a way to justify the internment towards the rest of the population without criminalizing the interns. So when they finally were released, because they were going to be released in their mind, they didn't want a big rejection from the rest of the American population. They even wanted people to be encouraged to give them a job. They wanted the society to see them as hard-working and good citizens that they were just taken away for some time. At the same time, though, they also, to get this objective, they didn't want any of the pictures to obviously show all the injustices that were being committed, just in case, because they didn't want anything to spark criticism towards the administration. And during wartime, well, they published and previously censored, obviously, material illustrating the daily life in the camps. With this imagery, what they were trying to do is hide the truth from the rest of the population. The picture that they were trying to paint was like they'd sent these people to a summer camp where they lived a decent life and they were well treated and they were just waiting the war to be over. We can see their point of view in the next pictures. We see that these pictures were never published at the time. These were the pictures that the rest of the population will see. They didn't see the stables, the filthy small stables that had to allocate 1 or 2 big families inside a really small space. They just saw wooden huts with a little vegetable garden and all the effort that people had made to make it feel a bit like home. We see the quote from the administration to see their intention. Their intention was to, I quote, "Reestablish the evacuated people as productive segments of the American population to provide, as nearly as wartime exigencies permit, an equitable substitute for the lives and homes it had given up, and to facilitate the reassimilation of the evacuees into the norms of the current American life. So basically they were trying to say, we're giving them the best we can as it is war, and when they come back out we want them to just continue like nothing had happened. Obviously we can see that the photography was always accompanied by a text, so they were giving context to the picture and therefore manipulating their perceptions with words. They used many euphemisms to prevent the prisoners taking their rights under the Geneva Convention. We'll see that with the type of wording they used. They didn't use prisoners, they used detainees or interns, and they never used concentration camps, they used internment camps. Together, all this was put all together with the idea of an ideal community. They were giving this idea out that there was an ideal community without subversions, that were well treated by the administration, and the core idea was that the families were kept united, and this was not true. People were not always in the same camp. If there was someone that was suspicious, or that they just didn't want some families to be together, just in case, they put them in different camps. Also, to achieve their objective, many photographs were completely used out of context, and we see that there was also big destruction of family albums. This destruction of all the connections that they might have had towards Japan, making disappear mementos from family members that had passed away. Just imagine the picture of your late grandmother that was in Japan, or that she was wearing a kimono one day. That was destroyed because it was deemed dangerous because it was Japanese. So they just eliminated all these precious memories just in case. And we have to take into account another thing. The fact that in American culture, especially in the 30s, the photography and the photographic representation will become one of the most important ways to represent themselves. This is a fact that is tightly linked to the perception of their citizenship as Americans. You ascribe yourself to being an American national, and you have some things that are typically American, and this was one, having photography in your life. It's just typical from that period. And because of this, during the time in the camps, after some time, there were many complaints because of the impossibility of fixing into photographs those unique moments that only happen once, like marriages, graduations, children growing up, because all of this was still happening. You still had people getting married, children being born, people going to school and graduating inside the camps. So everything, all this normal life and important moments were happening, and they couldn't put it into photography. So eventually it was made possible to build a little studio in the camp. However, obviously, the limitations were clearly set. Every day, the camp personnel put and removed the lens of the camera, and the action of shooting the camera actually was only permitted by a white person, personnel, guards, someone responsible of the administration. In the case of Manzanar, the living area, it's one of the camps, Manzanar, the living area had been the horse stables, and they were transformed into these only homes for thousands of families. As we saw in the previous photographs, undeterred by this tough situation, we have to acknowledge the spirit of the people. Come on. They made it possible to transform those grim spaces into welcoming houses with the most basic of tools sometimes. And of course, the people didn't just stay in the camps doing nothing. They were obligated to work on military or agricultural projects, but we have to say that little by little they were also permitted to create different services for the different needs of the prisoners. They were living there. They had needs to shop, to get their food, their children taking care of the schools. So little by little they started to build like small cities inside the camps. And we have to say that admittedly the resistance in the camps had little violent outbursts. But bear in mind that this was also due to the fact that they had quickly separated those who were suspected of Japanese loyalty, and that this population were American, and they were just determined to prove they were American so they could go back out. And their weapons was to try and keep life as normal as possible. So they just kept on working to prove they were American, and they thought that that way was just living as normal lives as they could. They wanted to show the administration and the population that they weren't dangerous because they weren't Japanese. They were of Japanese descent. They had American nationalities. And this is the end of part 2. There will be a part 2.1 that will talk shortly about 3 photographers in the camps that will complement a lot this lesson. So if you're interested also to see the origin of all this documentation, this visual documentation that we have, please go to the next lesson, and we'll be finishing this theme, this lesson on the concentration camps of Japanese Americans during the Second World War in part 3. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you next lesson.